Welcome to the semester channel, your channel of endless yet improved learning. We've had other videos on academia and research writing. This chapter is specifically laid out for chapter 1 of any thesis work. Now for chapter 1, its basic structure changes depending on the level of the individual, whether you are an undergraduate, whether you're a master's student, or a PhD candidate. So the structure of chapter 1 can change, all right, depending on your institution. So you could have different structures, you can have different additions, and some could be just following the basic structure. So the basic structure is what I'm going to take you through in this particular video. So the first thing we look at in the chapter 1 of any thesis is the background of the study, right? So the purpose of the background is to provide the context and also lead the reader to gradually get to the research problem of your whole work, right? So you are giving them the context. You don't know what you are working on, but then once I start to read the background of your study, I should know, okay, right now this person is working on malaria, this person is working on a comparative study, right? So the background should give me the context and also lead me into your problem, right? Good. So the structure is very simple, right? It should follow the funnel approach. Okay, so where we look at the global perspective. So in your background, I'm supposed to see the global picture. If you are working on any condition at all, we are expecting that you should have the global picture. What is the information on that particular topic globally? Well, you can look at estimates. Okay, so let me use malaria, which is whatever most people would appreciate. So what are the global estimates of malaria burden? All right, so you just put them down in words, you cite appropriately, right? To avoid plagiarism, you cite appropriately, you put the information down, and then once we are following the funnel approach, we follow through with the original perspective. Now when you talk about original from the global perspective, the original perspective then would be Africa as a whole, right? Africa as a whole, including west, north, south, all the different Africa regional perspective of Africa we have, right? You have all of them, and then you can then move on to a specific aspect of the region. Okay, so we have African continent as one region, and then the south, we have sub-Saharan Africa, right? So you can write on that. You can go further and write West Africa. Okay, so you can go in that funnel order and then put the information down. So you look at the estimates, the burden of malaria across all these levels I've spoken about, and then now you zoom in or you focus into the national perspective, right? So we are currently in Ghana. So what we are looking at for is the estimate of malaria burden in the country. Okay, generally, what do we know about malaria in Ghana? Right, so you tell or you put forward the estimates, and then you zoom into the local perspective. Okay, and in the local perspective, you are concentrating in the region or the community in which you find yourself. So in this example, we are saying concentrating on Kumasi, right? You can even go a step further and then focus on the locality you are working from, right? So these are the information that will be required of you to be present in your background of study, right? Yeah, so this is just a brief of what is expected in the background. Now from the background, you have to lead us into a problem statement. Now all of these things should point towards a problem, right? A gap that you and your research are going to answer. Okay, so the problem statement, the purpose is to convince the reader that a real problem actually exists, right? And that it needs to be investigated. Okay, so First of all, you need to state the problem, right? You have to clearly define the issue to gain the reader's attention, right? Once you state the problem, it is not just a one statement, okay? It's supposed to have a very brief background. So in Ghana, what do we know about malaria? We are still having the rise, right? We are still having increased malaria cases. What is the cause? What is the issue? What is the problem? Okay, so that is what we want to know. Clearly define the issue. Okay, but then before that, as I mentioned, you have to state the problem, give any indications of increase, all right? The causes of this increase, the causes of this rampant increases or surge in the cases you are looking at. All right, so that should give you a brief overview of your problem statement. Now from this, depending on the structure of your institution, okay, from this it should eat directly into your objectives, but some would eat from the problem statement. It eats into the justification for the objective, right? But then in our setting, this is what we do. Right from the problem statement, we should get into your studies aim. Okay, so what is the study aim all about? So after you have told the reader what the problem actually is, then you go on and tell them, okay, so because this is the problem, this is what I want to do, or this is what my study would want to do, right? So you have to state the overall intention of your study, right? And it should be a broad statement, only one statement. It shouldn't be a paragraph. 2-3 lines should be enough, maximum 3 lines, all right? And it always should start with a verb, an action verb. So an example: to assess, to evaluate, to determine, to investigate, to examine. So that's how examples of stating a study aim should be. So an example, as I've indicated, to assess the factors influencing delayed malaria diagnosis. Okay, so it could be to assess the knowledge, attitudes, and practice of children or of school-going age children on a particular condition, right? So that's how it should be, your main objective. And then you do also know that there are some characteristics or features a study objective or aim should have, right? So your research questions, after you have stated the study's main aim or main objective. Now, a study aim is supposed to be SMART, right? The acronym SMART. So it's supposed to be specific, supposed to be measurable, it's supposed to be achievable, it's supposed to be very relevant, right? And also time bound. So SMART. So once you've stated your objective, now you have to specifically state, right? Now it could be as many as 6-7 specific objectives, but then to be realistic, for undergraduate work you could have 2-3 specific objectives, and that's good, right? So with this, once you have your main objective, the specific objective is going to help you to answer your main objective, because your main objective is a very broad one. It encompasses almost everything your work would want to do. The specific objective is giving you like a target, a goal, like a milestone to your main objective. So if you have 3 objectives, right? Let's use the 4 objectives, specific objectives I have in this image, right? So the first one is to assess caregivers' knowledge on malaria symptoms, right? But then once you answer this section of the specific objective, it is answering your main objective, right? Good. So that's how specific objectives are. They are like milestones. Once you answer it, you are answering your main objective. Once you answer all your specific objectives, you've in totality answered your main objective. So that is how specific objectives are really important to every work, okay? Because you can't answer everything together. You have to break them down and then try to answer them. And by the end, you realize that you've provided an answer to the broad picture, right? Good. So that is the specific objective. So here, the second one is to identify caregiver-related factors influencing the delay of diagnosis, examine health system factors associated with the delay, and then so on and so forth, right? So you have to know that once you have your main objective, you should have the specific objective. In some instances, some institutions will require that you would have your specific objective and your research questions. Okay? Now, this is a twist. They are the same. They are similar. One is a question and one is answering the question. So, for instance, if you were supposed to go with research questions, you would have for the first objective, you would have what are the factors that affect caregivers' knowledge on malaria symptoms? That would be your question. And then your specific objective will be to assess caregivers' knowledge on malaria symptoms. So your question, your specific objectives in a way are answering your research questions. So some will just say, go with your research questions, right? Just state what is going to affect this, how will this do that, what is going to do this. Okay, so you state the questions. Others would want you to go with objective, to do this, to do that, to do that. Others will want you to bring both. Okay, so look at your terrain and know what is being required of you. Okay, yeah, so basically that is that for this. So from this, then you then justify, right? You then justify your study. And it is specifically to convince the reader that a real problem exists and needs to be investigated, right? So what is the main purpose of your work? You've stated a problem. You've stated how you'd want to go about it, right? That's your objectives. You've stated how you want to tackle this. So now, how can you convince me that your research is really important? And if there's any form of funding, I'm supposed to fund your work, right? So you have to explain the rationale behind the whole thing. And then you should answer key questions that needs to be addressed. Okay, and then you should also state common beneficiaries or stakeholders, right? So you can state that once we know the factors that contribute to caregiver issues, right, we can then inform clinicians, we can then inform public health specialists, we can even inform Ministry of Health. Okay, that these are the factors we've unearthed in our research, right? And so we need you to do this, do that to curb this particular issue, right? So the people who are going to benefit from your work, the stakeholders who are going to benefit from your work should be stated here. Is your work going to even inform policy, right? You are supposed to state that. So your work is so important that it is going to inform policy. It is going to change the paradigm of how people think about a particular thing, right? So that is that. So the foundations of your study. Okay, good. So once we are done with that, this is also dependent on your institution. Some will not bother if you add a statement of hypothesis, right? Good. But then hypothesis is just to predict the relationships between variables, okay, the variables of your study, right? It's just to predict them. So we have two of them. We have the null hypothesis and then the alternative hypothesis. This is also going to help you in your analysis and the entire work, all right? So with the null hypothesis or the original hypothesis, it's just to assume that there wouldn't be any significant association even after you've answered your specific objective, right? There is no significant association, and we get this from statistical analysis. Okay, and then the alternate hypothesis. Okay, the alternate hypothesis is that there is a significant association, or there is a significant relationship between whatever you are looking at and the main goal. Okay, so that is basically it. So that is that for this. And then from the hypothesis, we move on to the scope of your study. Again, this aspect for undergraduates, depending on your institution, you might not be required to provide this information. But for master's, PhD, regardless of your institution, right, you will need to provide this. Okay, the scope, because it's really important. When I take your work, I want to know what your work is measuring, what your work is looking at, so that I don't overestimate, overpopulate, or even overthink your work, right? So that I don't keep on, if I'm your supervisor, right, I don't keep on bringing external things in there. So for instance, let's take geographical scope, right? You are working in Kumasi, okay? So if your scope is just people in Kumasi, so I'm not supposed to be seeing any other thing outside Kumasi in your population, the participants you are working with. I'm expecting everyone to be in Kumasi. Okay, so that's one thing. So it specifies the location of your study. Specifies the location of your study. You have to know, okay, this study is being conducted in Kumasi. That is one. So I know that the study is focused on Kumasi participants. And then again, you have to look at the population scope. Who are you looking at? Are you looking at males alone? Are you looking at females? Are you looking at both gender? Are you looking at something in terms of age relation? Are you looking at children under 5? Are you looking at adolescents? Are you looking at everyone, regardless of gender and age? You have to state that in your work, right? So that it gives the reader a fair idea of how your work will be done, and also should have a time scope to that. You have to set the duration, and most of these things that I've mentioned in the scope would have to appear in the methodology, right? So that you give more understanding, more in-depth information when it comes to that. We will tackle that once we get to the methodology. Okay, so you have to set the study's duration. It's supposed to be within a year, it's supposed to be within 3 months, 6 months. So this should be the scope of your study, right? So basically that is it. In others, I've seen others having delimitations and limitations and all that, right? So depending on your field, just know what is being required of you and then provide that information. But basically, these are the steps. And then the last one, as I mentioned, okay, as I've been mentioned, it depends on your institution, right? So some would require that you define some terminologies you've used in your work. Some require that you cite even the terminologies. If it's a WHO assigned definition, you would cite this is from WHO, right? Good. So that is how basically it is. All right. So for instance, under 5, what do you define as children under 5? So a child aged 0 to 59 months. So that when I'm reading your work and I see any other thing outside this, I'll know that it's falling out of scope, right? Good. So basically that is what we look out for in chapter 1. It is very simple. For undergraduate, you should have not less than 5 pages, yes, without your references, right? Information should be not less than 5 pages. For masters, I think 10, depending on your region. So you see, you have to just make sure you find out from your department, okay? Find out from your department and see the requirement for that level, and then give the information. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, engage me in the comments and I will address them. Okay. Thank you.